Today I'm going to talk about 3 strategies that I used to come up with the floor plan and decide what was important and what needed to be in, etc. Now, they're not sort of strategies in terms of, I did this first and did that first and that first. It really kind of all sort of moved through each other, and it wasn't a nice, neat sort of checklist, but it did, especially in hindsight, really help me get clear on what was important to me. And I spent probably around, well, from the time that I paid the deposit to the tiny house builder to when she was delivered, which was about 8 months, I spent a lot of time trying to come up with the best floor plan that included everything I needed, and it was a lot of moving things around, and if you like. So the first strategy for me that was really important to get clarity on was why. Why do I want to live in a tiny house on wheels? What are the big problems that is a solution for, if you like? Now, if you watch my video on how did I end up in a tiny house on wheels, then you know that my main driving force was financial. I had looked at retirement at some point and realized that that was never going to happen unless I found a way to have a guaranteed roof over my head and was debt free. So when I did the design, when I started to think about what the house needed to be, it was very much driven by it needed to be as cheap, as low cost, not cheaply, low cost as possible. And the biggest outlay was really the tiny house builder building it to lock up, so that all that was really definitely the big financial outlay. And after that, it was really keeping it as low cost as possible, and that meant that I wanted to reuse as much as I could. So I lived in a 3-bedroom house. We had lots of furniture, and most of the furniture didn't make it into the house because it just couldn't. But there were some things that I thought were useful, and although I may not have straight away had a role or a place for them in the house, I sort of went, well, if there's anything that I need where this could be part of it or help, then I want to use it. So, for example, we had a daybed, an IKEA daybed. It was my daughter's bed at the time, and I knew that it would make a great no cost couch. It was handy because it also has 3 very big drawers, and 2 of those drawers ended up being part of my daughter's wardrobe solution for a while. And in a tiny house, you're always looking for storage, and so that was a great way to use it. My daughter used the daybed with a normal proper mattress, but I still had some spare single mattresses, and I used those to make the cushions for the couch. So that was one of those things where I went, I don't, although I'm not too fond. I mean, it's a bit big for a couch in such a small space, but it definitely, but I had it, and at some point in the future, if I feel like it, I can change over to a different solution there. But at the time, I was like, I have it, so I need to build it in. And it actually came in handy in a way when I started to design the floor plan for another reason, main reason for wanting to live in a tiny house on wheels. And that was I wanted to build something and have something that I would not ever have to move out of again. So I didn't want to be in a place where I had to, I had a house, and then for whatever reason, if I moved, had to pack everything up, find a new house, do all that. And an extension of that would be that I wanted to be able to age in place. So I hope that this is the place, the house, where I will see out my days. And I plan to have lots of days. When my daughter was little, I promised her that I'd live to be 100. So I have a way to go. So I should spend a long time here. But I realized that at the moment I have a sleeping loft, very comfortable, going up and down. One of the hardest part of living in a tiny house is to make the bed, change the linen on the bed, but I'm very comfortable doing that. I called up my loft yoga, but I'm realistic that at some point I will probably not. It will not be as easy to be up in the loft for sleeping. So then I need another solution, and because this is a day bed, coming back to my couch, not that I want to use this as my bed, but it meant that I have the floor plan, the size of the living area will be such that I can somehow come up with a downstairs sleeping solution. It will not be a separate bedroom, but it will be. I have a few thoughts about what that could look like. I didn't really go into a lot of detail, but one of the things is that potentially I can remove the spare loft ceiling and then have an elevator bed, or I can have a Murphy bed, and so the space is big enough for a bed of some sort. That, with the idea being that the bed is not always a bed, that there's not always a bed there, that it can move away. But yeah, so that was another part of the design, or the why, the dictated part of the design is, if I know that I'm going to age in place, I will need at some point to move downstairs for sleeping. How could that potentially work, and making sure that that's a possibility if that happens. Then and another part is sort of the financial why, was that it's interesting because I realized not so long ago that when I was little, and I mean about 9 years old or something, my dream was to live in a tiny cabin in the woods, and then I lived in cities for most of my life, adult life. And then when we moved out of Sydney, that was my first sort of step towards living more rurally. And the financial component of living in a tiny house was that I will never be able to afford to buy a rural place, but I will be able to afford to rent a little corner of somebody else's rural property. And that is it's one of the reasons why I wanted to go tiny. Doesn't really have much to do with the actual design, but it was a big driving force. So that's kind of the why and how that impacted my thinking about the design. The second sort of strategy is to think about the what, the how. So how do I live? How do I want to live? And because, I mean, the idea of living in a tiny house like this, for me, was to be able to live the life that I want, and not a life that is dictated by the house, if that makes sense. To make that clearer, so all the houses that I've lived in, except for the very first houses that I lived in when I came to Australia, but most of the times I've lived in houses where there was very little connection with outside. And as I get older, I feel more and more the need to see greenery, to hear birds, you know, to be able to, I mean, we've just come out of a period in spring where there's lots of things blooming, and so the smell is just wonderful, and that connection with the outside. And I lived in houses. One house was a townhouse that had no outside whatsoever, a little tiny little balcony of my main bedroom, but sitting on that balcony I was basically sitting in the units behind, so that wasn't a very pleasant place to be. And many of the houses, including the house that I owned in Sydney before I moved down here, that house had a lovely garden, and I worked very hard to create a beautiful garden, but I couldn't see it from anywhere. I could see it from my bedroom, and to get to it I had to go through the kitchen, through the laundry, which was very narrow, and then you got out into the backyard. And so, and out of sight, out of mind, right? So I would never really think about going outside. It wasn't easy to go outside. So how do I want to live? I want to live more outside. And how that impacted my thinking about this design was that I wanted to be able to see at the outside from everywhere. So I've got big windows. As you can see here, there's a big window, and there's trees behind, and when I sit on the couch and I can just look outside, and all I can see is birds and certain parts of the year bats, lots of bats, but lots of trees, and I can sit here. And I've got my French doors, as you saw in last week's video with the tour, and so I can, wherever I am in the house, I can look outside. I see outside. I immediately know what the weather is from just having a quick look, and that sense of going, it's easy to go outside. In the design plan, I definitely included outside space, so a big deck. I haven't built that here because, as you probably know if you watch my previous videos, the plan is to move to a rural property, but I made a little outdoor seating area, and you know, that's where most of the time I go to have a morning coffee or to have my lunch, I'm so much more outside, which is exactly what I want and how I want to live. I feel that for my mental health, definitely very important. Also, how I want to live was in a light-filled house. So the house that I lived in when I was doing up the tiny house, it was such a dark, gloomy place that even on the sunniest, brightest day, I would need lights on, and that was really depressing. And there were days when I was working here in the tiny house when it was overcast or even a bit rainy, and I had no electricity here yet, and I did not need any lights on here. And then I would get home and had to go and turn all the lights on because it's like walking into it was constantly that sort of late afternoon, early evening kind of sense, and I found that really depressing. And part of that light is big windows, but also that's why I kept the walls all very light. They're all white everywhere, and to me, and that really for me helps. Furniture is white. I've got, of course, I like color in there, but it is all very light, and I find that very it gives me energy, and it makes me happy and cheerful, and I definitely didn't feel that in many of the houses that I lived in. And then the other, how do I want to live, or how do I have to live, is working from home. I do, I run an online nutrition clinic. I have to work from home I work from home from that. I do freelance instructional design work. That's all working from home. And so I had to have a space in my house where I could work, but where I did not have either spent out, a lot of time setting it up, and also where I didn't feel like I was constantly looking at work, which is really challenging in a tiny house. Plus, how do I work? I stand up, so I needed a stand-up desk as well. Otherwise, I could potentially have done something else, probably. So that also needed to be part of the design. And so I now have, I had a little bookcase that I already had, that I shortened to the height so that I can, so my monitor and my laptop are on top of that, and then it's exactly high enough for me to stand, for my keyboard, and to make it not look work-wise as much work-wise as it could be, is when I'm finished with working, I have a sort of a big shelf that I put on if I'm working, so that I have a better space for my keyboard and my mouse, and then when I'm done, I take that board off, I store it on the side of the couch. It's out of the way, out of sight, and that is kind of a transition action from work to living room. But that is, so that was something, so that those are the things around how do I want to live, and how do I make that possible in the tiny house. And then there is the what is important and what isn't, and that is very key to finding a floor plan and a design that is this is what I love about living in a small space. I never really thought about it until I had to try and fit lots of things into my tiny house. It's challenging, but at the same time it is a wonderful opportunity to really get clear on what is important. And as if you watch the video on how did I end up living in a tiny house, I watched a lot of TV shows on tiny houses, and I subscribe to a lot of channels around tiny houses, and I love sticky beaking other people's houses and get ideas. And initially I got annoyed by watching those because people wanted such weird things, in my opinion, in their houses. And it wasn't until I really started to think about what I needed and how, that I realized, well, that was important to them, but it's not important to me. And it really made me think, what is important to me? For example, my kitchen, I am not a great cook. I don't enjoy cooking. I cook all my meals because I'm a nutritionist, and we get a bit funny about food, and what I eat and not eat. But I really don't enjoy it. I'm also not an entertainer. I don't get a lot of people over for dinner. So I knew that I didn't need a big kitchen. And the joy of fitting out a tiny house is that you're not really I didn't feel dictated by convention, if you like. So I don't have a cooktop. If you picked up on that in the house tour from last week, I don't have a built-in cooktop. I have a portable induction cooktop that lives in a drawer, and I take it out and I put it on the kitchen bench, and when I'm done it goes away again, and that leaves enough space on the kitchen bench to do normal things, but it doesn't take up permanent space. And I love the fact that I didn't have to worry about resale value. Same with the bathroom. I can so I have a composting toilet, but the space where the toilet is, I don't know if it was very clear on the video, and when I do a video more specifically about the bathroom, you'll probably get a sense of it. It's very narrow. Fine for me, but I could imagine that it's not something that, if you had to think about, well, at some point I want to sell and get good, be able to sell it for a decent price, you wouldn't make those decisions. But because I'm going to age in place, I'm going to really, hopefully, live out all my days here, And if I don't, for some reason, this goes to my daughter and she can do with it what she likes. I don't have to, you're not as restricted by convention, if you like. So in terms of how what was important to me and what wasn't, one of the key things that I did not like about a lot of tiny houses was that there was so much built in. So especially a breakfast bar as the dining space. I had my dining table that I wanted to bring, and not only did I want to bring it as a table, I wanted to bring it, but not just, even just, I could have used just the top of it to make a breakfast bar, but I wanted it as a table, so it can be moved. It can be, I can move it out. I think I may have said so in the video last week, but for example, if my daughter and her boyfriend come over for dinner, then we can just move out the table, and we can all sit around it, which at a breakfast bar, when I sit at the table with someone else, I want to be able to look at the person we're having dinner with, and so we can talk. And so that was one thing. I wanted the table to be just a normal dining table setup and not a breakfast bar. I wanted a clear living room. I saw some houses that had you come in and then there's the kitchen on one end and then the bathroom on the other, and in the middle is sort of the living room. I wanted it to be sort of, a clear, separate living area. And I like that it's underneath the loft because it gives a bit of a more of a cozy sort of feel. But again, that was something that for me was important. And then I've already mentioned it, but I wanted to, I mean, what was important was, because my daughter was going to come with me, that she had her own space and that she had a place that she could get to, even though it's open, so we can whisper in here and the other person will hear it, but she needed her own space, and so that's why I've got two big lofts, and so that was also really important to have. And then simple things like, I like sleeping up in the loft, but it's a really unpleasant place to change your clothes or get dressed. It's like you're in a tiny tent and lying down, and so I knew I'm happy to go up there and down and change the bed sheets and all that stuff, but getting dressed up there was not going to be handy. And then I realized if I'm going to dress and undress downstairs, then it's silly to have your clothes storage upstairs, because you have to go up, get your clothes, come down. And even for my daughter, initially she said, I'm happy to have my clothes upstairs, and in the end she was very quickly realized, no, it's better to have it downstairs. So I had to build in clothes storage and wardrobe space downstairs, which means that initially my daughter had one wardrobe and I had the other, and now I have both. But it's fantastic to have it downstairs, yeah. Another thing that was important to me, just coming up, realizing that as I look at it, from all the kitchens, because that's one of the things I went through all my houses and where I lived, and things that I disliked, found really difficult. And one of the things that I hated about all the kitchens that I've had is that they all had cupboards, and you lose things in cupboards because you have no idea what's at the back end. And so all my cupboards, even my clothes storage, have drawers. So under the kitchen bench it is clear drawers, and in the pantry has pull out wire drawers, and those are also in the cupboards that are wardrobe space, because that's how you can see what's there. So yeah, and a lot of this came from watching other houses, tiny houses, thinking about also in the houses that I've lived in, so really thinking about all my experience, but also getting ideas from other tiny houses. And I guess that's one of the reasons that I will do much more in-depth videos coming up for various houses of an area in the house, to hopefully give you ideas as to how you can do things, or it gets you thinking, or it gets you sort of going, well, that's not important to me, which is very valuable. Right, so that's kind of 3, and as I said, I call them strategies, but they're kind of sort of big picture, slightly less big picture, and more detailed thinking about what is important, to come up with what is important, and then try to build it into your design. And that, I have to tell you, it was hard work. I enjoyed it, and I started with, as I was thinking about all of these things, I started with, got some clarity on what was important, and then I started by drawing just on a piece of paper how that might look, but that's 2-dimensional, so you kind of don't get a sense of what happens if things go up. I also I had an outside porch area in the house that I lived in, and with chalk and I actually on the pavers measured out the size of the house, so I could get a sense of, and then I drew on the floor where things were going to go, so I got a more of a real life or real size experience. And then I found a free software online. It's called floorplanner.com, and that allowed me to actually start to build the space, and you can get to see it in 3D, which really helped kind of bring whatever was going on in my head to life. And the hardest part about all of this was to create my stairs, to fit it into space in a way that is still comfortable walking up and down, and would be within my skill set. As you know, my skill set is IKEA flat pack, and my stairs are fully IKEA flat pack. And none of it is none of it was designed by IKEA to be part of stairs, but I made it work. Right, so I really hope that this kind of gets you to think about some things for when you start to think about designing. There are no real right and wrongs around design, how you design, but it's unique, I think, designing for small spaces, that you can really go a bit off the beaten path and make it right for you. I mean, you have to be so clear on what's important and what isn't, because you simply have no space for the things that are not important. All right, next week I'm going to tackle the all-important question, how to find parking for your tiny. And what I'm going to do is take you through my experience and why I am where I am, and why I'm staying where I am for now, and also why 2 other opportunities for a parking spot that came along fell through, and what I learned from that, because they were fairly traumatic experiences. So make sure you subscribe so that when that video is published, you'll know, because parking spots is one of the biggest concerns for many people when it comes to tiny houses, specifically tiny houses on wheels. All right, that's it for this week. Have a wonderful Sunday, and I will see you next week when we talk all things parking spots. Bye.